Hey everybody, well, welcome to Adapter Hell. I've got a few things that I've been experimenting with and trying to figure out how to put things together to accomplish different imaging setups. I've got the original DSLR, the Canon T2i that I used to take pictures with. I've got the ASI 1600 that I am taking pictures with. It's got an 11 millimeter end fitting here on the end. I've got the Celestron off-axis guider broken down here. All of these parts, except for that, these parts here all go with the Celestron off-axis guider. I bought that some time back in due to some analysis that I had done. I've never used it because I've always been afraid I'm not going to be able to find a guide star. But I want to have, and I'm going to do another video after this, focusing mostly on the off-axis guider, and I think I'm going to be going to it, certainly for my SCT, maybe not right now for the Refractor. But anyway, we'll talk about that. The Celestron guider is fairly heavy, large. It comes with a lot of pieces though, several adapters here, adapters, end fittings, the SCT, here it is, the SCT interface. So this would screw into the end of the Schmidt Cassegrain, and then the body, and then one of these adapters, which would then go to onto the camera. I've also got the visual back from the Explore Scientific refractor that I have. I have the adapter that I asked the folks at Explore Scientific to get from Bresser. It was on their website, but this screws into the end of the hexafocuser on the end of that that ED102 I have, and terminates in an M48 thread here, which I thought would be useful so that I could create an all-threaded connection from my camera back to the telescope and then avoid using this. Another thing that I explored, came out at about the same time, are these Clicklock connectors. Now this is also a friction connector, but this end here screws onto the end of the extension tube just like this, so it has the same thread here as this does. Now, when you put in a nose piece, for example, it would fit in here, and then you tighten this up, and now you have a very secure connection. So it's a much better connection than these 3 thumb screws on the visual back. Plus, it allows you to orient the camera any way you want, and then tighten it up for a very tight, secure connection. So this is a very nice adapter that I have here from Baader. Just because you can't have enough of these, I also ordered the corresponding Clicklock for my SCT. So in this case, this thread here is the same thread that's on the back end of the SCT. Well, what I've been doing is, where I didn't have measurements from the manufacturer, I've been going through with my set of calipers measuring all of the optical lengths of these various items. I've took measurements of the height of the prism above the baseline here, the inner diameter, the size of the prism. These things will come in handy later when on the next video, when we talk about the off-axis guider. Took some measurements from the bottom of the prism up to the top, what kind of range. This is a helical focuser, so it has a range of adjustment here. I measured what that was. Anyway, took a lot of measurements, put those in an Excel spreadsheet, also drew simple idealized versions of these things in a CAD software package. And yeah, why don't we take a look at the summary of the measurements I made in Excel and how they stack up so that I can connect various things to the various telescopes and get the proper back focus. Okay, so here we are in the Excel spreadsheet. All of those pieces you were seeing on the table there, I've listed here, and the corresponding optical length of the part. And as I say, where the length wasn't given by the manufacturer, then I measured the length. But the Celestron off-axis guider and its parts are here, the body itself, the adapter for the SCT, and then the 2 flavors of adapters with internal or external threads. Then it came with 4 spacers, 3 of them M42 type, and 1 of them an M48 with these links here. The Explore Scientific telescope came with 2 of these spacers, at 37.5 millimeters. There's one that's on the Bresser Germany website. I've asked Explore Scientific if they're getting it in, and they said they are, so it should be on the website probably within weeks of recording this video. I also have a measurement of a typical spacer, the 37.5 millimeter spacer, with the click lock added on, so that increases the length to a total length of 81 millimeters. Alternatively, I have the spacer with the M48 adapter that I got indirectly from the Bresser website through Explore Scientific, and that overall length is 44. And then the spacer with the visual back is 55. Well, there are a number of these here. The SCT click lock is 47 millimeters. You get down here to the adapters for the ZWO that come with the camera and the filter wheel and so on. But all the links are here. Now the question is, how do we put these together to get the proper back focus? Every optical system has some distance measured from a reference point going back away from the lens where focus will be achieved. And it's our job to put together enough pieces to satisfy that back focus. Now, of course, with the telescope, we have a focuser and can move that about a bit, but you like to be close to the desired point just so you don't have to run the focuser all the way in or all the way out. And so what I've done here is a little geometry study, stacking up these pieces over here on the left-hand side to give me the back focus I need for each of the two optical systems I have, either the ED102 refractor or the SCT down here. Now, for the ED102, I have been using a particular stack up since I got the telescope. This is it. I've got the camera, the filter wheel, a series of the adapters that come with the ZWO camera, a nose piece, and then the Explore Scientific spacer with the visual back. That's that 3 thumb screw adapter that I was trying to get rid of and ultimately did, and then one more of both of the spacers from the Explore Scientific telescope. And when you add all of those up, I get to 171.5 millimeters reference to the back end of the focuser. Now, when I have these all stacked up to this level, the focuser is at mid-travel, so I could go 20 millimeters in or 20 millimeters out. So this is a good target point for alternative configurations that I've looked at here. For example, I bought a field flattener. I've noticed in my early imaging that I do see stretched stars around the boundary in the corners and so on. So I got a field flattener, but that field flattener comes with an additional requirement, which is that there has to be 55 millimeters of back focus behind it. So what I'm doing here, these red numbers are those items that are behind the field flattener, and so these have to add up to 55. And as you can see, the sum down here says 55. So all of these stack up. The camera, the appropriate selection of adapters adds up to the 55 millimeters of back focus. Then we get into the field flattener here. The shoulder has a 10 millimeter thickness, and that sits within the click lock holder, that ratcheting device, and we'll stack this up and put it on the telescope here in a second. And then one more of the Explore Scientific spacers. So together, when you add all of this up, it comes to 183.5 millimeters, which is pretty long. It's still within this. In other words, I can take this number and go to 191 before I run out of focus. So I've still got some breathing room theoretically with this number, so it should stay in focus. If not, one of the things that I might like to try is replacing this 37.5 millimeter spacer with the spacer over here that's 25. So for example, if I type in item 15, it goes in and finds 25 and then adds that up, and now I'm right back where I started. So it's right in the focuser is right in the middle of its range if I can get a hold of that spacer. I'm not sure I need it. It could very well be that the spacer I have handles it and I'm able to focus. So it's just a matter of running the focuser in about 12 millimeters and I should be able to achieve focus again. So this setup should work with the field flattener. Before I didn't have a field flattener. Now, something else I was experimenting with, I'm not sure how comfortable I am with this crazy setup here, but I'm trying to include the Celestron off-axis guider that you saw in the beginning of the video here. And it's a bit challenging. And in part, it's a complexity that the Explore Scientific field flattener throws in that makes it difficult to achieve this in what seems like a reasonable way. So once again, we have the field flattener, which means all of these items here are a given. Once I put the field flattener in, everything else is dictated by its back focus, so all of that has to be there. The problem with the Explore Scientific field flattener is it has a barrel that it's attached to, and that barrel has an inner thread, presumably for filters, but that filter thread that they use appears to be something like an M48 by 0.6 millimeter pitch, whereas all of the other M48 adapters and threads are M48 by 0.75 millimeter pitch. So when you try to screw on this field flattener onto the end of a M48 adapter, it will go a couple of turns and it binds up, and so I don't feel comfortable really ratcheting down on the tightness of the barrel, because I'm afraid I'm going to damage the threads that are in there. So that means that I have to use this field flattener with a click lock, but I'm not using it with the Explore Scientific click lock, or the one designed to match the Explore Scientific extension tubes. I'm using it with the SCT click lock, which means now I have to have in this case it's a blue Fireball SCT thread to M42 thread adapter. It's only 1 millimeter thick at the shoulder, but it's kind of corny because I use that, attach it to the three pieces that make up the off-axis guider body here, and then we finally get into there's one adapter here that I need to get back into the telescope, and that threads onto the ES Explore Scientific M68 to M48 adapter, which in turn is mounted on the end of a spacer. However, you can see I have a little minus sign here, so that means I'm subtracting off the spacer that I measured here. All that means is that this adapter is just screwed right onto the end of the telescope, right on the end of the focuser. And so in theory, this gives me the 170 millimeters of back focus for the imaging plane, and I also am able to maintain the 55 millimeters I need for the back focus of the field flattener. But this adds quite a bit of weight onto the end of the focuser. It's not something I want to do. I don't trust the focuser. That's one nice thing about the SCT. You can add all the weight you want, and it's just screwing onto the back cell of the scope body and doesn't affect the focuser at all. But anyway, I suspect if I go down the path of an off-axis guider for the refractor, it'll probably have to be one of the lighter weight and thinner off-axis guiders that are out there, such as the one manufactured by ZWO. Anyway, these two configurations, with and without an off-axis guider, but that include the field flattener, look like they will serve me well going forward. And we'll look at this buildup of this configuration here in just a second. Now, I've done the same thing with the SCT. My original configuration that I did my imaging with before was only with the T2i, the Canon DSLR, and that has a Canon T adapter and or I should say a Celestron T adapter that mates up with the Celestron T ring that in turn mate up to the lens mount of the Canon T2i, and then they are set on or mounted against the SCT threaded standoff of 10 millimeters. So this part is actually part of the telescope here. The important thing here is that when I use this with the focal reducer, the Celestron focal reducer, it's important that these two numbers add up to 105. That's you got to have that number if you're going to use to maintain the proper back focus for the focal reducer. In this case, though, the total setup here from the back of the SCT is 115. So now, when I look at additional configurations here, I want to make sure with the ASI 1600, I want to make sure I'm close to that 115 and maintain the 105 millimeter standoff or something close to it for the focal reducer. Now, one option is to use the same T adapter I was using before, but use an adapter that ZWO sells that allows it to screws into an adapter that in turn mimics a Canon lens, and that way, and then it converts that Canon lens adapter into an M42 thread. So basically, it's this little part right here that I can take and screwed right into the back of the filter wheel. So I go from the camera to the filter wheel to the Canon adapter, and then screw it onto the SCT, just like I did with the camera. And it gives me basically the same numbers for all intents and purposes, 113.5 millimeters instead of 115. That's no problem. I'm off by 1.5 millimeters perhaps of back focus on the for the focal reducer, but there is some glass in the filter wheel, of course, the filters, and I don't know, some people say that adds 1 millimeter at least of light travel. So I could be right. I certainly don't think I'm too far off for the focal reducer not to work. So I suspect this combination would work. An alternative is to use the SCT Clicklock adapter that I bought. And in this case, I can use the filter wheel, use the 21 millimeter and 16.5 millimeter adapters that come with the ZWO camera, and then that mates up with the nose piece that slides into the Clicklock. The Clicklock itself is screwed onto the back end of the SCT, so that all is a nice threaded connection, and this is a nice mechanical connection as well. But this is a nice threaded connection. It gives me exactly the 115 millimeter back focus that I had with my camera, and it reinstates the 105 millimeters of back focus for the focal reducer. So all I would have to do is just unscrew the click lock from the back cell of the SCT, put on the focal reducer, and then screw this back on just onto the end of the focal reducer, and everything will be just fine. And then one thing that I'm definitely getting more and more confident and believing that is necessary is to start imaging with the off-axis guider. We'll talk about this in the next video, but I wanted to see what the stack up would be to, once again, give me the numbers I need, the back focus and whatnot, to achieve focus. Here I've got the, again, the camera and the filter wheel, of course, one of the adapters, the 11 millimeter adapter, and then we have the filter wheel body. And of course, the SCT adapter just screws right onto the end of the SCT. So this gives me 114 millimeters, which is fine, right at 115, and 104 millimeters for back focus for the focal reducer. However, once again, maybe the filters in the filter wheel will throw in an extra 1 millimeter to give me 105 millimeters. Anyway, it looks like all of these combinations are workable, and I'm confident now that whenever I switch configurations, I know exactly how to build up the configuration to be able to achieve focus. Now let's go back to this configuration and do a stack up of those and see what that actually looks like. Okay, so here we are at the telescope. Got the guide camera cable in my way here. Get that out of the way. We've got the back end of the focuser is right here. And the two Explorer Scientific 37.5 millimeter long spacers, or extension tubes, are right here. All right, so this is an M68 external thread by 0.75 pitch. This is the click lock that's produced by Baader that has the same thread, so we can just screw that on. Nice tight connection there, so good threaded connection all the way back to here. Here is the ZWO camera, the filter wheel, the adapter that goes from a internal thread in the filter wheel to an external M42 thread. This is an 11 millimeter adapter with an M42 thread on both sides, internal thread on both sides. And so now we have to connect this to the 21 millimeter the 16.5 millimeter adapter. That in turn will mate up with the M42 or the M42 thread here. However, we can use the ZWO thread converter to go from M42 external thread to an M48 external thread. And so this should just wrap right onto the Explorer Scientific field flattener, as so. And now this will thread into the 16.5 adapter, which has an M42 thread on one end and an M48 thread on the other end. Now, one thing about the, while we're at this stage, this is the Explorer Scientific Field Flattener. So it's got this body. This is threaded into this shoulder, or this tube piece here. This has an internal thread that looks like it's M48, but when you try to thread a piece onto it that is an M48 by 0.75 pitch thread, you can only get so far before it starts to bind up. And as you, I don't know if you can see it, but there's still a gap between the end of the shoulder of the tube and then the shoulder of the adapter here. And while it's a little tight, and I could tighten it more, it's binding up, and I don't want to damage the internal threads on either part here. So it's kind of irritating. That means this part has to be used. It's a 2-inch shoulder. It has to be 2-inch diameter, so it has to be used with a something like this Clicklock or the original visual back with the 3 set screws. But here I like this system a lot better. We can hold it, push it up against the shoulder, and then I just rotate this until it's nice and tight. And now it has a very firm grip on the body of the field flattener. It's not going to let it go out. I feel very confident in it. It's a nice piece of equipment. And if you have a situation like this where you need to use a 2-inch body and grab a hold of it, I think I much prefer to use something like this rather than those 3 set screws. But in principle, this is the full setup that should give me back about within the range, the focus range of my system here. And then of course the guide camera can plug back into the camera here. Okay, so we just assembled this configuration right here with the camera filter wheel, the male gender changer for the M42 thread in the filter wheel from an internal thread to an external thread, then the 11 millimeter adapter, 16.5 that goes from a 16.5 millimeter adapter that goes from the M42 thread to an internal M48, and then we use the little cute little adapter that converts the M42 external thread to an M48 external thread. And then we were able just to screw that onto the field flattener and then connect those parts and then slide it into the Clicklock, tighten it down with a nice tight fit, and then the final spacer to the back end of the focuser, which gives us theoretically a back focus that is adjustable within the range of focus travel left in that particular focuser, so it should work. Now, another thing that I've been doing, I've taken these numbers and the adapters we've seen, and I've gone to a CAD program, and I have drawn each of the adapters, at least loosely, to the proper scale for all of the adapters we saw on the table before. So all of these green pieces here, these are the pieces that come with the Celestron off-axis guider. The red correspond to the ZWO components. This is the T-ring adapter that I got from Celestron and the T-ring that mates up with Celestron mounts that basically mimics a lens. And this part I got from ZWO that mimics the back end of the TTY itself. So again, all of these adapters, including the Explorer Scientific features, the 2 Clicklock elements I have, and then the blue Fireball adapter that gets me from the SCT thread to an M42 external thread. All of these have been drawn up, and I can use these as I go through that Excel spreadsheet and find a configuration that I like. In particular, the more demanding cases are the off-axis guider cases, and I can just drag and drop these pieces together to make the proper optical configuration. Okay, so here are the configurations drawn up and assembled together so that we can see how everything fits and how it fits onto each of the 2 telescopes. These are the 5 configurations that are defined in that Excel spreadsheet. The one that's shown here, this is the SCT. This has the T adapter connection, and so this would just screw right onto the end of the threaded, the 2-inch thread 2-inch diameter thread of the SCT. Alternatively, we can use the Clicklock, and alternative to that, we can use the off-axis guider. Now, similarly, over here, we have the Clicklock assembly with the field flattener, and then a couple of spacers followed by the camera, the filter wheel and the camera, or again, alternatively, we can use the Celestron off-axis guider if you're comfortable with hanging all that weight off the end of the focuser. So anyway, this has just been a little review of some of the considerations we have to give for back focus for different optical systems and different configurations. And I think it's kind of useful to have at least an Excel spreadsheet summarizing all of the adapters you have so that you can put them together in the proper way and achieve the right back focus, because you want to do as much of this kind of planning and setting things up inside before you go outside in the dark. The last thing you want to do is go out there with a sack of adapters and start playing around with switching things in and out. Do all that indoors to the extent possible. All right, I'll see you in the next video, and we'll talk a little bit more about setting up the off-axis guider.